here today of DDP practitioners. We have Joy Gamble, who is a DDP trainer and consultant in Somerset. We have Alison Keith, who's also a DDP practitioner and trainer and consultant. We have Edwina Grant, who's up in Scotland. She is a DDP trainer, consultant and practitioner. We have Delroy Madden, who is a youth worker, with Children Always First in the Midlands, and also has trained level 1 and level 2 DDP.
That's right.
Yeah. And we have Kim Golding, who is very well known to many, many people across the country and the world. DDP practitioner, consultant, trainer, and all-round DDP expert.
Oh, thanks. No pressure.
And I'm Sez Morse, who is also a trainer, consultant, and practitioner down in Brighton. And we're gathering some thoughts today about how to help transitioning out of lockdown and starting to think about how it's going to be, particularly for traumatised children, the sort of children that we meet through DDP, the children who are in foster care or adopted, and how to help the adults around them. We're thinking about their foster carers, their adoptive parents, and we're also thinking about the school staff and how the schools will meet their needs, their very complex and complicated needs, which are going to be ramped up and exaggerated and activated so much right now by the current situation, and also coming out of the current situation back into school. But what we also have just been discussing is that these children aren't going to be alone in their fears. There's going to be a lot of children who are going to be very unsettled, very unsure. So hopefully a lot of what we're talking about will fit for many children and many parents and carers at the moment. Yeah, does that cover it, everybody? Anything else anybody wants to add to that? Okay.
I make one question. Do we need to include kinship care in that?
Oh, I think kinship care is really important, actually. Yes, thank you, Edwina. Yeah, residential care for sure. So young people in all those settings across those.
You're a natural presenter there. Sorry, Edith.
Oh, that's good. We've got to think of particularly, I think, those sort of groups that we might miss. And we've talked sort of vulnerable families and how DDP might be helpful for them. What schools are going to be up against. You know, we're asking so much of teachers and so much of foster carers, kinship carers, residential care workers, adopters, and parents in general. Look, everybody's really going to be struggling, aren't they, to figure this out. Isolation is the breakdown of a person. Every bone in your body has shattered, and you stay in the dark. Your screams of pain echo with sounds of silence. No matter where you run, no matter how far you hide, darkness is always there beside you. Loneliness is always there behind you. You scream in agony, bellow in pain, but no one comes, no one helps. Only the never-ending sound of the whispers of the creaking floorboards and walls are there to greet you. The air gets thinner every breath. The wounds get larger every step. It feels like the whole world comes to a standstill, but it continues to hurt even when you beg for it to stop. No matter how hard you break yourself, no matter how much you fight, it will always find its way back to you. There is no justice in it. There is no escaping it. It will always find its way, always.
Self-harming.
Because he can say it, self-harming,
yeah.
Because
anger, aggression.
Yeah. So understanding the needs behind behaviour and being able to write that so beautifully means that it's far less likely that he's going to do.
Yeah. And that we can all hear it and be appreciative of him sharing it and expressing it, I think, you know, and being, I'm here, I'm with you, I can hear it.
Yeah, and be joyful that he can put it down on paper. Wow. And share it. Wow.
Yeah. So many of the kids we work with don't always manage that, do they?
few years ago, I think I heard I think it was a news report of some teachers in a school where a lot of the children were children of parents who were drug addicted, and how they were talking about the play that the children were bringing into school, and they were playing out injecting and your drugs, and how the teacher's response to that was, we must shut this down, we must get them playing nicely. And there's something about allowing children, because when children come back into school, you know, they are going to want to explore the experiences and worries and fears that they have, and it's helping the adults to have the confidence to allow them to do that and not to feel we must shut this down. And it might be, I'm scared that Granny will die, or my Granny has died, or you know, or playing out something around that, and just allowing the adults to know that, because they're so frightened of feelings coming out sometimes, some of these adults. So I was just thinking, it really horrified me at the time to hear these, you know, this report of, we must stop these children playing, injecting drugs,
right,
and not realizing what the children were trying to do with that.
Yeah, because I suppose from our perspective, we would think it's really healthy if they are able to say what's going on for them. I mean, that's the difficulty for so many of the kids that we work with. They wouldn't be able to say it. They might show it in their behavior. They probably wouldn't even be able to just play it out in that way. They'd probably just show it by, you know, deliberately touching someone when they know they're not supposed to, or doing some more tricky stuff. So I mean, we were talking about that, Sez, weren't we? And how you then help teachers not to go straight into kind of managing that difficult behaviour. Well, they would need to manage the difficult behaviour, but alongside that, recognising that the child is feeling really anxious and scared underneath, but they didn't have any other way to show it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And what came out of our chat this morning, which Edwina and Claire from Strathclyde made me think about, were how teachers are so trained to teach. You know, that is their kind of, they don't feel like they're doing their job. Maybe they don't feel valuable if they're not teaching. So helping them understand that actually creating safety and helping children to figure out what their behaviors are saying is so valuable, you know, and that is just giving them permission, but really a real understanding also of how important it's going to be for a good few months for kids to be able to do that. It's going to be essential, isn't it, that actually dropping the curriculum and not worrying about the maths and the English for now is actually doing such a massive service to these kids. From, you know, even from a neuroscience point of view, maybe it would help them to understand, because I think it's going to be really hard for teachers to make, it's such a big ask for them, isn't it? To switch to creating safety. And
yeah, because you think about some of that, we try to help the teachers understand the children that we work with and how, because they're so anxious, they can't learn. But actually, what teachers are going to be faced with is that probably the majority of the children that come in are going to be feeling anxious. So the majority of the children aren't going to be feeling safe enough to learn. So learning has to be very much down the kind of path, doesn't it?
Actually, to have the teachers come back in first for a couple of weeks, so they get opportunity to vent about how difficult it's been for them, loss and death and trauma in their families and in their communities, and then to be really focusing on, well, how do we do this reconnecting as a team, because the intervention is going to be the education team, is going to be the school. So
that
how
sounds
do we work?
so important.
Focuses on supporting not only the teachers, though, the Janny and the ancillary staff and everybody in the school who is part of that community, but also bringing parents and carers into that too.
And recognising, you know, I think two things I want to say. I think one is thinking that every child is different, every parent is different. Every child and parent will have had a unique experience, and to be mindful of that. You know, so for some it will be a relief that the kids are going back to school. For some children it will be a relief that they're getting back to what has maybe been the only safe place they've had in the past. For others, the separation anxiety is going to be extreme, but the carers might be relieved or might not be relieved. You know, there's such there's going to be such individual differences, isn't there?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people are going to look for a one-size-fits-all solution. So how can
Exactly.
schools be flexible enough? And then also, what I was also thinking about the exhaustion levels of the parents, because I'm obviously hearing more about adopters and foster carers than I am birth parents at the moment. But in the early weeks of lockdown, I was hearing a lot of very positive stories. This is a great time. I've got to be, my child is, the stress has gone down. I've got a chance to get closer to them. You know, we've got some really good opportunities here. And now I'm hearing stories of, you know, Delroy will know some of these carers that Benita's been talking to me about. They're worn out. They can't. They're doing this 24/7. They're feeling they're not being recognised. They're not being understood. They have no certainty about when this is going to end. And then also the anxiety about, but when it does end, we've got to help these children leave and go to school, and that's also going to be difficult. So I think it's thinking about how we support all the adults in this on both sides, and the uniqueness of everyone's experience, I suppose, is what's in my mind at the moment.
Yeah, that's exactly what
I was thinking
Sorry, Delroy.
Sorry, following on from Kim, that's the exact pattern that we've noticed over the 8 weeks. At the start of this pandemic, we was expecting to be overwhelmed with calls from carers and parents with having to deal with children being at home for all day and not being at school. But kind of the opposite happened, where the children were really enjoying it and a lot of them were thriving. So it kind of showed us that school is a massive stress factor for a lot of children, especially children who have got an avoidant attachment style. So now, in the last probably 2 or 3 weeks, where there's some talk of school restarting again, a lot of children's anxiety is really shut up. So we're getting a lot more calls from carers asking for support, and it is around this fear and anxious feeling of having to go back to school and be put inside that environment, which causes a lot of stress for them for the majority of the time. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is around caring and helping the carers to sit with this and letting the child know that it's okay to be worried and it's okay to be anxious, and really working on that acceptance phase. Some of the practical suggestions we've talked about with schools is allowing them to do a phased return, so they're not just shoved straight back into going back into school 5 days a week. So it kind of eases that anxious feeling on the part.
Recovering, our schools will need to be relationally led. Each week, I have cycled the 8 miles to a flat on the outskirts of town to meet with a very important 11-year-old pupil. He is important because he's going to help me see the lockdown through his eyes. 7 weeks ago, on my first visit, he was reluctant to come out from his bedroom. He knew me from school, but I got the impression I was intruding by coming to his home. I was representative of an adult world that has let him down too often. When he finally emerged from the world of Xbox, he looked more like a zombie, blinking uncomfortably in the sunlight as he stepped out of his front door. Why don't we go for a walk? You'll have to keep 2 meters distance from me. Initially, this walk was just an excuse to check on him and remind him that he wasn't forgotten. Now these walks have become routine. They have even taken on a name, a safe walk. I'm not sure our first walk was very safe. He suggested go to a lake near his home. He wanted to show me the swans that were now flocking to the shore in hope of being fed. Suddenly, he panicked as 4 or 5 swans surrounded us. Come back, I shouted, as he legged it over the nearest fence. I tried my best not to collapse in laughter, but played the hero and corralled the swans away. He gingerly reappeared, looking a bit embarrassed. He lives with his elderly gran, who has health problems and is bedridden some of the time. He's representative of one of Scotland's more vulnerable youths. Even before the lockdown, his attendance at school was spotty at best. His clothes were often smelly and his hair unkempt. His outward appearance spoke of neglect, and his demeanour told of his sadness. 7 weeks later, when I arrive outside his flat, thankfully less out of breath from the cycle ride than I was at the beginning of the lockdown, he meets me with a big smile. I show him the skimming stones I have collected in my garden for him. He enthusiastically leads me down to his lake. We pass a swan sitting on its nest. He tells me he has fed the swan, but I notice he is also keeping his distance. I also notice his hair is longer, and as if to make the point, he pulls it down over his eyes. We laugh. We arrive at the small beach, and he skims each stone, carefully counting how many times they bounce across the water. He watches a dog swimming out to fetch a stick and laments about his dog, who won't even put a paw in the water. I'm surprised how well he looks and how easily he engages with me. I ask him if he misses school. He answers with a resounding, "No, I'm bored sometimes, but I don't miss school." A couple of weeks ago, a social worker persuaded him to attend the local school hub for children of key workers and vulnerable young people. He went for 1 day. The teacher shouted at me, he said. He said we shouldn't be kicking a football. Like the vast majority of so-called vulnerable young people in Scotland, he didn't go back. Why should he? A foster carer recently told me, "My children are much happier at home, they are much less stressed." I hear there are leaders in education talking about how we recover our schools. Many of the young people I see and talk to each week are not happier in school. They say they don't get shouted at and they aren't made to look stupid in front of their friends. If we have any hope of getting young people back to school, it will be because there is at least one relationship they value. I turn to leave, and he asked me if I can come earlier next week and walk further with him around the lake. We end our time with a competition to see who can throw the stones the furthest. Perhaps as we think about going back to school, this will be a time to rethink how we relate to young people and reimagine how education can help children see that they are very important. They need, as we all do in order to learn, to be and feel safe, to feel they belong, to enjoy being with us and us with them. We need to recapture the fun and spontaneity children bring to life. They will play such a vital part in our recovery as a society.
That's lovely.
Isn't it lovely?
Mm.
Connection too. It's very, very attuned to that boy, isn't it? It's very differentiated, and that's the other bit that I think is such a strong message about it.
Yes, I wanted to see what he says. David says, I wanted to experience what lockdown was through his eyes.
For him, yeah.
Yeah, so beautifully written.
Yeah.
And that's just a key message, isn't it? It's trying to understand through the eyes of the other person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really step into their shoes. Yeah. And make sense of their experience, particularly, and letting them see the impact on you, because I think that's going to be so key, isn't it? Is getting that message across of, I've missed you, I have been thinking about you, I am still here for you through it all. Yeah.
But it's how we get the staff initially, or how we help the senior managers get the staff into that open and engaged space first, so that they are able then to make the connection. There's a lot of the staff, certainly from who I've been interacting with, are in such a tricky place that even if they kind of got that message about the importance of connection, they're not open and engaged enough yet to be able to do it, I don't think.
No. And that's the bit, I suppose, Edwina was saying about teams coming together before Joy, isn't it? And how giving them enough time, heads really getting that message that actually you've got to build them up first. You've got to give them that foundation, haven't you?
The driver will be the head of the school.
Yeah.
You know, there will be some political guidance about this, about how we go back, right? And then authorities will have their own guidance, but actually schools need to co-create how they're going to do this for their children, their parents, their carers, and their community, because they know their school population. So schools will need some autonomy, because if they're told what to do, that's going to be traumatic as well.
teachers who can't regulate them, won't we, or dysregulate
Yeah.
them.
And teachers need to hear from the heads that it is okay not to be concentrating fully on the curriculum, that actually we want you to concentrate on creating safety for the children first, that the learning will come. But they need to hear that from the heads, don't they? Not actually from us. We can say that, but they need to hear it from their heads, get permission to do that.
Yeah.
We have a lot of children who are moving from, we call it P7 to S1, you call it year groups, but who won't have been able to say goodbye. So how is that? How could we think about some of the things to do with that? And when it's relational, do we think about S1s being buddied by secondary 1 being budded by secondary 5 pupils, and so there would be some way of thinking about those older children coming in first with the S1s to help them settle into the school.
Lovely. Yeah.
Just ideas, and they're not necessarily DDP, they make sense, but they are all very relational, and they're trying to promote what is good practice anyhow in terms of buddying for everyone and mentoring for everybody into a whole school approach when the transition back comes.
Yeah.
Just things that have emerged out of creative conversations. Amazing.
Yeah, I really liked what you said this morning, and maybe I misunderstood you, Edwina, but were you talking about staff buddying up as well?
Yeah.
I thought that was lovely. So you've got your person in school. Yeah.
I started off with that just then, and then busy day moved off into talking about children. But the idea of staff buddying as well in terms of support.
That's so nice, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Then you know you're held in mind by one other person, and that person is going to check in with you in school.
Yeah, it's okay to go,
yeah, that co-regulation.
Yeah, out with the ears of the children, obviously, but to actually validate, you're going to have to vent. This is going to be really hard.
Yeah, and thinking about all the stuff Alison was saying about how much staff are putting themselves on the line at school, and I think that's a really lovely idea. It's sort of putting some relational support in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Joy, were you trying to say something?
No, I was just thinking, I don't know why it linked me back, but I was also linking back to thinking about carers again, and another stress for the carers I'm imagining is different children within their family are going to be going back at different points. So the whole sibling rivalry, if she's going back, I don't want to go back, all of those bits. You're staying with carer or mum or whoever, and I'm going to school and I don't want to be there, but I do want to be there. I can just see that causing real tension as well.
Yeah, I've already talked to some pet families who've got exactly those dilemmas.
I'm sure.
There's also, can we also think a little bit about children's experience during lockdown and fear and loss?
Yeah,
I think the loss is huge.
Huge. I mean, some of the children might be bereaved. They certainly will have heard a lot of talk about risk. I mean, I'm just trying to think what it must be like to be living with, I don't know, a parent with one of these illnesses where they have to be shielded, and to be hearing the stats on deaths, and they had, who has underlying health conditions and not. Think what that's like. Or, the community you come from, the culture you come from has an increased risk of death.
You're so scary.
That's us. Just thinking about what children are going to be carrying, and how parents and teachers can work together to support children with those feelings of loss or fear of loss that's going to be around. And this
massively reactivated, Kim, when they go to school and are separated from their carer maybe, or their parent, if they've lost someone during lockdown, and then the secondary losses.
And will you still be there when I come home?
That's what I was going to say. That's a huge worry, isn't it? So it's how do we help teachers to be able to speak some of this out loud to increase the safety, because that will be hard, won't it? Because it's such big, painful stuff. And that's really what we're saying to teachers is actually, if you can, like you were saying, Delroy, about helping foster carers to really sit with the feelings, that really is what we're going to be asking teachers to do, as well as talk out loud some of this scary stuff, because the kids probably won't be able to say it. So really making guesses and talking out loud about how hard this is every day.
It's a conversation I've had with a few foster carers, because coming from an ethnic minority background, the statistical data behind the death rate is quite scary. For a black male, you're 4 times more likely to die, and it's the same for Pakistani and Bangladesh background, that you're 4 times more likely to die than a white European person. And the scary part is that there's not enough data for us to even know what the cause is, whether it's because we're more, there's a genetical disposition to the disease, or whether it's social, economical reasons, because minority groups tend to be in the frontline jobs. So the carers are worried about this, and this fear can be picked upon by the child, and the older children have access to the news as well. So they're just as in a heightened state of fear, really, of loss, like Kim said, loss of a relative, loss of a loved one, or even going to school and bringing the disease into the home is another massive worry with children and with foster carers. So mapping out how you have that conversation with carers and children would be useful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there may be an increased risk of racism or bullying around race as well, given the origins in China and some of the rhetoric that's been around about China, as well as the stats on, you know, ethnic minorities and their increased risk? And you can, you know, some children coming in and actually picking up on that. I just wondered what you think, if that's likely to be an increased risk.
I mean, definitely. I mean, we saw or I've read reports of Asian children being picked on as being the source of the virus, and then misinformation spreads. There's misinformation that black people are more likely to spread it because we're more likely to catch it. And the school ground can be a very vicious place, as we all already know. So some kind of support around or conversations around preparing the child for those type of things.
Yeah, and preparing staff and parents as to how to manage that and deal with that, because presumably children will be bringing their own fears, and some of that bullying, racist type behaviour will be stemming from their fears and need to control, and how you support both sides of this, the children who are perpetrating the bullying or the racism, and the children receiving it. Because everyone's vulnerable here, aren't they?
Definitely.
When we talk like this, it makes me think about actually how hard this is going to be. I know we already said that, but what actually it makes me think about what we're asking teachers to do. There's so many different levels. So, you know, I'm kind of imagining that could happen at school, and then I'm hoping that teachers will be able to help the children to figure that out, and help the child that's being picked on to really think about what that feels like for them. So there's just so many levels of what we're going to be hoping that teachers can do whilst they're feeling scared themselves, potentially. It's huge, isn't it?
The senior leaders in schools need to really give staff the space to express their fear as well, don't they? Because especially with the unions in England really hyping it up at the minute, I think staff are going to be really torn between those that just want to go back and get on, and those that are actually showing real fear. So, you know, I was thinking, I was at a governor's meeting for my children's school last night, and they are talking about having the staff for a whole week, the first week of June, before the children come back in. And I was helping them to think about how do we support the staff with that, because until the staff, as we know, until the staff are kind of relatively in a safe, even-ish keel, there's no hope for those kids going into that classroom, is there?
No.
But at the same time, there's also some opportunities. So in my children's school, they're in a middle school, but they're going to have 6 or 8 only children in a classroom with one teacher. So there's some real opportunities. I was thinking back to my early days of education and little tribes and doing lots of things in circles and tribes and emotional stuff. If we could help staff to think about what they could be doing once their own safety is in check, you know, to really build relationships and connection in a way that you can't when you've got 30.
And it is a big deal, isn't it, for the staff, what we're asking them to do. put their own children at risk, and you know, all those things. It's massive. But also thinking about some of the children that we work with who usually have extra support in classes. Well, my understanding from hearing from some of the schools is that that won't happen, because the extra support needs, because they have to have smaller classes, then everybody needs to be taking the children. So I do worry about, and I suppose they're thinking that maybe if there's smaller classes, then the children that we work with will be able to manage. But because it's going to feel so different, because they're going to be so anxious, I worry that that is going to be helpful. So I think it's just thinking that through, thinking it all through, isn't it? Is knowing. So I was talking to a carer whose child is actually currently in school, and again, actually she's managing really well because she's in tiny classes. There's not many people around. It's much quieter. So from a sensory perspective, it's been so much easier. So for her, it's the other children coming in that's going to be difficult. So I think, like you say, Kim, every situation is going to be individual. So there won't be an answer that will fit for everybody. So that's one of the things that I think is how we help people to really try to have the time to think about each of the children and what they need. And I know that's a big ask, but that's going to work best for.
A lot of the carers are actually going through dealing with these different range of emotions that they're picking up from the children, and it is triggering a lot of past trauma in the past and fears that they have, and it's presented in lots of different challenging ways. So I think they are really looking for answers from somebody or from somewhere. They're not really sure in what kind of way that's going to present or play out for them in their own scenario.
Yeah. And I'm wondering about your relationship with them. If it'd be really helpful to hear a little bit about how you feel your relationship helps them. Like, you must be such a kind of constant in their lives.
Yeah.
As a support worker, that's so key, isn't it? You're just so present.
And it's been a kind of a struggle for some of them because they're used to us physically being there, and now that relationship has turned into like a telephone relationship. And with some of the younger ones, have kind of struggled because it's very similar to the contact that they have with their birth parents, where it's just over the telephone. And a couple of the young people have kind of, our relationship kind of had to rebuild it, because it was kind of looking at me like the parent that had abandoned them or left them, and now he's just speaking to me on the phone like Delroy doesn't care about me anymore. And we've had to kind of rebuild that relationship and that kind of trust again. And sometimes it's taken quite a while to do that, which is quite
and I wonder but that's how it's going to feel for kids that have support teachers or, you know, special teachers that support them. They might feel abandoned by them too, and that might take time as well, mightn't it?
Because I think that's the key bit in what you said, isn't it, Alison? What Delroy said was like, it's taken a while, and it's that staying with, isn't it? We often hear, I've tried PACE and it didn't work, you know, or because the kids are going to reject them and fight them off, aren't they? In the way that you've probably been a bit rejected and fought off when you've tried to build connections on the phone, or because it's different, it feels scary to them, doesn't it?
Yes, very much. I mean, I had one child who would, when I spoke to him, he would like, so I don't want to talk to you. And he was doing it just to test me to see if I would persevere in the conversation. And it was a foster carer that said to me, he's just testing me to see if you're going to stick with it, or if you're just going to say, oh, it's okay, you know, I don't want to talk to you. So there was little challenges that the child was putting in there to see if I was being genuine or whether I would stick it out. So again, that's just a coping strategy that the young person puts in place and themselves to protect themselves, really.
Brilliant. Yeah. And those sort of examples, I think, are going to be so helpful, aren't they? Yeah. Actually, just really interpreting what's going on underneath that rejecting behaviour. Yeah, really helpful.
Again, there's another, these sort of banner headlines about slow down to go faster, have patience.
Yeah.
double up pace. There's just a few maybe banner messages that can
Sit with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
These are helpful banner headlines to
Say what you see.
Say what you see.
Say what you see.